get started. It's about 7 o'clock. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Deanna Lightsky. I'm the Chair of Servant Leadership here at MSOE, and I wanted to thank all of you for coming to this introductory session starting bright and early at 7 a.m. And I'm just going to turn things over right away to Dick and Tom, who are going to talk to you about the introduction to servant leadership.
Thank you, Deanna. Tom and I will just share with you some fundamentals, very fundamental. And this nuts and bolts session happens to be on on YouTube, the most popular thing that people look at. And people keep coming that are fairly seasoned. So with that, we're just going to start with some nuts and bolts. The focus of this session, the bigger session that we'll take it here, is the development of others. So this is the classic, what is servant leadership? Here it is. There's another statement. Tom, what would you say about that?
This is the foundational work. Greenleaf gave us the language and the vocabulary. There are other people who have taken it now and reinterpret it. I think the real tendency today is try to make things simpler, and yet you can lose the profundity. I think when you look at this statement, it's extraordinary when you begin to recognize that the role of servant leadership is not on the development of the leader, it's on the development of the followers. How do I pay attention to the lives of others? And then you notice that last line, you don't find this in any other leadership theory. And how will the least among us be affected? How do we look to the margins? How do we look to the people who are on our organizations with the least amount of power? So Greenleaf was very prophetic, if you will, in readiness back in the mid-1960s, and then continued developing this until his death. So this leadership theory is profound, it's complex, it's paradoxical. A servant leader, one of the things that's very important to recognize is that when the idea becomes popular, it loses its power. And we have a tendency to want to popularize things. What's the leadership du jour? What's the newest book? What's the latest workshop? And servant leadership has this foundation that people continue to build on in a very slow, deliberate, and intentional process.
Yeah, and unfortunately, servant leadership is becoming very popular. If you go on the internet, I mean, universities, colleges, institutions, everybody has a servant leader program now. 10 years ago, it was not that way. So we have the danger of putting labels on it. Years ago we used to call it the ABCs. Every 5-10 years we get another bunch of vernacular that describes something that we already knew about. Servant leadership is different. It has some elements that no other leadership style has, and we're going to go to that in just a moment. But if we just go to some listening, empathy, listening is the ultimate. That is the ultimate. Do you really know how to listen? To your dearest friend, your wife, your children? Start there. Do you really know how to listen? We've all had feedback on that. Empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people. We're going to kind of focus on that. Community. I'll give you an example to the commitment to growth of people. Years ago in our industry, which is pretty structured, and structure doesn't actually get anything done. It helps you focus, but it doesn't really deliver. How do you help people? It's not through structure. It's one person with another person. So we asked our electricians, in this case, what would you like to study? What would you like to learn? And we set up a pilot program with one branch that was designed to, over a 3-year period, get the average electrician to get 16 hours of continuing education on their own time. Our unions said, you can't do that. I said, if they volunteer, can you? Well, yeah, of course. Our Contractors Association said, that's absolutely crazy. You can't do that. You're going to get in trouble with the union. And I said, well, we'll see. So we took a survey of all the people, and we said, what would you like to learn? We listened, and they came back to us, and they said, here's the things we'd like to learn. So that's what we did. And you know what happened after the first year? We exceeded what we set out to do in 3 years. We exceeded it in a non-traditional way, in an industry that said you can't do it, Contractors Association and the union. We exceeded it. And that was the ethos, you might say, that began the learning organization, which 15 or 20 years later, a guy named Sangi, who you may be familiar with, he may be old now too, I don't know. But he said, the future of institutions are learning organizations. Let's look at, here's a study that the Greenleaf scholars took up. And they said, these are the things that we have determined are the uniqueness of servant leadership. And so they took these and they went out to all organizations and they studied it. And they found out what was the difference between other leadership styles and this. And you will notice in there, there's a lot about community, about lifting up other people, about growing people, the subject of our discussion this morning, or the focus of it. You want to make any comments about this, Tom?
Look at number 6. Provides emotional support and guidance for subordinates' personal problems. Can you imagine what it must have been like? AT&T Corporation, 1960s, the largest corporation in the world, and your vice president for human relations and leadership development talks about healing as being one of the characteristics. Healing. There's so much pain in people's lives, and where do people spend the majority of their lives? In the workplace. So again, servant leadership is meaningful, ethical, and practical. Here's a practical example. Dahl Automotive in La Crosse, one of the second oldest Ford dealership in the country, now has a new generation of the sons of the great-grandfather who are carrying on the organization. They're growing. In the last 5 years, they've doubled their dealership. One of the things that they've done is they have brought in somebody to talk to the salespeople, mechanics, service advisors about their marriages. Because the automotive industry has a high level of divorce. You're working evenings, you're working weekends, the levels in terms of stress, high levels of divorce. Well, they realize that if you have turmoil in your marriage, it's going to affect your ability to operate within the dealership. It has just been amazing. Last year, they had their best quarter in 125 years because of that personal commitment to their employees and their families. And when they have a Christmas party, the Christmas party is for the families as well, for the whole organization. This is different ways in which to lead and to serve other people. And although it's become rather popular in terms of nomenclature, in terms of servant leadership, it is dangerous when you have it in your vocabulary, but you don't have it in your heart. When you start using the language in terms of servant leadership, now you're raising a level of expectations. Am I going to be served? Because if I'm not, then I'm feeling like I'm being manipulated. So this is a high standard to set it for ourselves. Now, one thing that I would just point out is, although it might seem so obvious that you want to serve and develop the lives of other people, after I got done with a 40-hour training with a group of insurance people, a guy came up to me, he's about my age, in his early 60s, and he said, I never knew there was another way. He said, but all my life, it's like I was like a horse. You put blinders on and keep hitting in the butt with a stick. That's all I knew. The only model that he had ever experienced was being the boss. Telling other people what to do and then punishing them if they didn't do it. Sadly, I think that model is all too prevalent. So this is a major shift. And I can only imagine what the conversations Greenleaf had back in the 60s and the 70s when he started talking about emotional intelligence even before we had a language for it.
Here is something done by Ann McGee Cooper, a longtime servant leader, consultant, business, providing this to organizations. And she describes the difference between the traditional boss and the servant leader. And where do we have one up here that is lifting up people? Developing personal power base. Uses perks and titles to signal who has power. In the servant leader model, develops trust across constituents, breaks down hierarchies. Listen deeply, respectfully to others, especially those who disagree. That's a big one. That's number 3. Number 1, uses personal trust and respect to build bridges and do what's best for the whole. This is a very easy chart to take and transfer one to the other. Okay, one more story. Delphi was a big GM corporation, made pieces and parts for the automotive industry. Big plant here in Wisconsin. One of their divisions made brakes in Ohio. 1.2 million square feet of brakes. That's all they did is brakes. They were the company in the world. And there's a story, Piper Electric actually paid to have it written and then use it in their own development as a case study. But the story, the essence of the story in this regard to developing others goes this way. They got a mandate from their company that was in receivership, Delco. And they said, they got a phone call and they said, your division is to be eliminated, part of the reorganization. Oh, it was just a phone call. And don't worry about it, we'll have cash coming. The cash never came. So here they're faced with thousands of people with a high precision quality product that they just can't abandon their customers. They say it's going to take 2 years to train competitors on how to build these brakes and get the quality where it should be, lest we be a part of a moral disaster. So they said, what are we going to do? The first thing they did is they went to the people and they said, how can we help you with your careers and where you're going to go after this? That became the focus. They had some knowledge of servant leadership. So they went, they used those tenets, the general manager and the VP of personnel. And they used that to drive everything else they did. How can we help you in your future job? Now, a lot of people left. Over a 2-year period, they hired more people than they had originally. It was that much turnover. What happened to the quality? It went up. This division that had never made money before, and that's why they got canceled, had never made money before, followed all the procedures, built a reasonable quality product, otherwise they wouldn't have the marketplace. At the end of the last 6 months of being in business, they made money. Interesting story. But they began with, how can we help you in your journey? That drove the underlying. And it comes from the heart. You don't do that when you've got a mandate to eliminate the business you've spent a lifetime in. When you've got many employees whose total lives were committed in this area, whose pensions were on the line. But that's what they did. That's not just commitment. That's not motivation. That is passion, and passion from the heart for the right reason. And that is the difference between servant-led companies and those that are not. And nobody is ever perfectly in the queue, but frequently, when they go in that direction, everybody reads it, and people come forward. They love it.